Today I'm presenting on my Econ 340 paper, Gender Bias in the Video Game Market. Basically, I had this kind of idea that came from a couple of stories in the video game industry. There's lots of rhetoric, lots of conjecture about this kind of thing, but not really any hard empirical evidence. So I wanted to see if I could tackle that. So, have any gamers in the room? Hell yeah, I do. Okay. you guys remember this game, Bioshock Infinite?
That's a game. Yes.
That is a game. I know.
Sure.
I know it.
All right.
You got one.
How about this? You guys remember this game?
Oh, I heard about flopping.
Nobody remembers remembering. That's the point.
Yeah.
He's a female character. Got us. He got us.
I feel like the female character would make us remember it more, but anyways, I'm sure you'll talk about it.
Well, do you remember this game, anyone? Yes? No?
I do, but I don't know anything about it. That's just because I have no life. It's because I have no life. That's the only reason.
Strange, man.
So the point I'm trying to make here is that all three of these games had a lot of coverage for the kind of gender things that were happening in them. First one here, Bioshock Infinite, heavily features a prominent female character in the story. Basically, the whole crux of the story is a female character. And she was removed from the cover because the publisher believed that it would hurt sales to a certain degree, that it was necessary to take her off of it. Remember Me was a game that came out in 2014, I think. And complete flop, sold very, very poorly. It had gone through several different development cycles at several different studios. And the publisher basically amounts it to, it has a female in it, it has a female on the cover, that's why it flopped. But then kind of the evidence against that is that Life is Strange is a very similar case. Very prominent non-sexualized female on the cover, and it was a hit. So what is the truth here? Right? Is there actually a gender bias in terms of the cover art of video games? So that is my research question. Does featuring a woman on a video game cover show a relatively negative effect on sales? And I should actually change this because the regression is actually testing for non-sexualized female. So when it says woman, pretend that it says non-sexualized woman on it. I didn't have a chance to change that. So this is how I think I answered that question. Again, I'm working with a smaller data set than I'd like to be just because of time constraints. And still kind of working on the econometric stuff. There's some issues to be banged out, but I think that the findings so far are interesting at least. So again, random sample of 300 PS2 games from a larger pooled data set of 3,000 games and sales, using multivariable linear regression with dummy variables for a set of qualitative features and then controlling for a handful of other things. And then hypothesis testing for the all-nil dummy variable. So this is a little sample of what my data looks like, lots of ones and zeros, and I stared at this for a long time, just manually putting in every single qualitative element of video game covers. Is a very fun time. So basically I'm basing my model off of Gary Becker's taste discrimination model. This is a very interesting model to me. It's something I learned in labor econ. The idea is he was analyzing the labor market, labor discrimination. So there's two different kinds of discrimination that he talks about. There's statistical and there's taste discrimination. Statistical discrimination is kind of intuitive. Basically, if you're discriminating based on statistics and your statistics are right, that could actually be a profitable thing to do. Whereas taste discrimination for the vast majority of the time is not profitable. It's utility maximizing for employers, but it's not profit maximizing. So he models it so that it can be modified for employers, employees, or coworkers, customers, or a combination. And he theorizes that association with a discriminated group has a non-pecuniary cost to discriminators. That non-pecuniary cost is captured by the discrimination coefficient, as he calls it, which is meant to quantify the dollar value of the disutility of associating with the discriminated group. So I love simple mathematical models, and this is just about the simplest it gets. It's a variation of Becker's model. So instead of it being that the source of the discrimination is usually, we're looking at as employers, this is going to be customer discrimination for for consumer video games. You can see the variables here. And it's very, very simple. I'll go ahead and point over here. So basically, when you're paying for a game with your preferred group on it, your utility cost is whatever you pay for that game. But if you're paying for a game that features your non-preferred group, your utility cost is the price of the game plus whatever your discrimination coefficient is. So basically, what that means is that if the average video game consumer has a positive discrimination coefficient, you would expect that there would be higher sales on video games featuring only men or sexualized females, theoretically, rather than non-sexualized females. So here's some fun summary statistics. Just some interesting couple of things. The Metacritic scores, if you guys aren't familiar, is basically an aggregate of game reviews, average from 1 to 100. So the mean is about 69.6, and the median is 70. Systems is just the number of systems that's available on. North American sales, obviously, is the sales, and year as the year came out. So that kind of gives you a frame for what the data looks like. And then here's some more fun little summary statistics. This is where we get to the kind of real interesting stuff. 8% of the data featured non-sexualized women, 16% featured sexualized women, 51% featured men exclusively, 75% featured men in general, 31% featured a weapon, 45% were licensed games, 50% were sequels, and 16% were exclusively men with weapons, and that's just the all-male dummy multiplied by the weapon dummy. So this is just a little thing showing you how the Metacritic score plays into sales. I still need to kind of test a log-law regression for this for heteroskedasticity, but yeah, just a little visualization so you guys can see how Metacritic scores affect sales. And then this is interesting to me. This is basically the sales plotted against year, or year plotted against sales, rather. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at this because right in 2006 the PlayStation 3 came out, so obviously you would expect to see a huge drop in sales at that point. And then obviously the housing crisis and the recession didn't do it any justice either. So this is my regression. This is actually not representative of the regression I'm going to show you because originally I was running year as just a regular variable, but I decided to break that up into dummy variables because of the data I showed you before. But I didn't update it on here because it's a lot of stuff to type out. So just assume that that year is broken up into 9 different years into dummy variables. And so this is the basic hypothesis test. So just as kind of background, I ran a regression with all of my variables, and the omitted dummy variable is non-sexualized female. So if the all-male beta coefficient is positive, then we can assume that the discrimination coefficient in this market is positive. So I apologize that this regression is a little bit dirty. I just reran this regression today and I didn't have time to make it look all pretty and fancy, but basically what you want to look at here is the all-male coefficient shows, oh, these are millions by the way, shows about 160,000 units sold as compared to non-sexualized females. And TSAT is 2.083, the p-value is 0.038. So pass the hypothesis test, so that's some interesting stuff. So kind of repeating what I just said, and ignore this number because it's wrong. So 98% confident, I think it's actually a little bit less than that doing the new regression, but it still passes the hypothesis test. So that's my findings, is that the discrimination coefficient is positive for the general video game consumer. So another thing that I found is you can see here on the regression that Metacritic scores very surprisingly have a very positive effect on sales. That's another interesting little statistically significant thing here. The number of systems makes sense, right? Higher budgets, you're going to release your game on more systems. And then another one, sports games, apparently a pretty solid thing there. And then sequel, I think, is an interesting one too. Sequels always sell well, so that's why there are so many freaking sequels in this industry. So moving forward, I'm going to be continuing to do this research. What I was kind of suggested by Dr. Pop and by Dr. Gill was that I should just go for the full 3,000 observations. So I'm probably going to need some help doing that. I'll figure out how I'm going to do that. But Dr. Gill seems pretty interested in it, so we might be collaborating over summer to do this and potentially past that point. I'm going to be incorporating more dummy variables, so I'm going to try to capture every single publisher What I was doing before is I just had a dummy variable for basically high budget publishers and low budget publishers, which is not super, it's not going to capture really the kind of nuances of that, difference. So I'm going to actually make dummy variables for every single publisher, so it's going to be a huge regression. And then another thing too is the kind of potential analysis of the supply side of this market. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about towards the end of this is that there might actually be something on the developer side that would play into this as well, because coming up through the late 70s, 80s, 90s, even still today, but even more so back then, most programmers were men. That's just, the way things go. So obviously men are going to make games that appeal to their sensibilities, so that might have shaped the market to be more exclusively male. I don't know if I believe there's anything intrinsically appealing to men about video games, though people theorize. But yeah, so I think that it would be kind of interesting to look into some maybe wage discrimination in the supply side of the market as well. So another thing I want to do also is look at try to replicate the study with PS4 data. If you guys are in tune with video game culture at all, you may have heard of the infamous Gamergate that happened in 2013, 2014, which is basically a huge scandal that involved a lot of people up in arms about sexism in the industry, and lots of toxicity on both sides of that argument. But basically what I would do with this replication is kind of try to test to see if that whole movement actually caused any change, or if it was just lots of people shouting at each other. But I would have to wait until the PS4 data is complete. That's why I use PS2 data, because all those games have already sold through what they're going to sell through. So maybe in a couple of years I'll be able to replicate the study and compare my results. And here are my references. So that is everything. Any questions? Oh. Any questions, guys?
So what is your explanation for positive, for the increase in sales with males on the code?
So I think that it really just boils down to the fact that the vast majority of the market is male. Especially, this data is about 10 years old. Not only that, but also the fact that at that time the market was much younger. I think that generally kind of tween guys tend to be a little bit more discriminatory than mature men. So I think that's a big thing that plays into it. But the kind of obvious thing, and it's reinforced by the decisions of these publishers, is that if you are a 12 to 18-year-old dude walking into GameStop, it's just, I think, generally eye-catching to have a big macho dude with a gun and be like, hey, I want to be like that. And so there's some kind of psychological aspect to that. And then also, obviously, sexualized females, sex sells, very, everyone knows that. So that's pretty much my answer. But, yeah. Any other questions?
When you say your sample size was 300, that means 300 games?
Yes.
And so there's 3,000 PS2 games?
There's more than 3,000. There's like 3,200 something. Yeah, there's very, very many. In fact, because partially the reason I wanted to do PS2 is because I grew up with PS2, so I was like, I read about this thing that I loved as a kid. But when I actually looked into the sales data, PlayStation 2 has the most games of any system that has ever been released.
That's what I was also wondering.
Yeah.
And do you think the data would differ at all if you were to do like PC gaming, or what do you think it would yield similar results?
That's a good question. I think that the PC audience generally skews older, so that might play into it. Other than that, actually another thing with PC too is that, especially now, even 10 years ago, Steam was around 10 years ago, right? I don't know if it was.
I know it was 10, but it's been around.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. Actually, that'd be a lot harder to look at because the marketing material for PC game, like as digital downloads, it's going to be much more spread out instead of just you've got this cover that you go to the store and you buy it, But yeah, that's an interesting thought for sure. Any other questions, guys? So.
The only other issue that I saw, is in your data where you have kind of a few issues, I guess.
Yeah, please tell me.
So you have your Metacritic, which is obviously statistically significant. have you thought of trying to test to see whether or not you're getting kind of a bias effect from like a game being just good and having a male on the cover?
Right. I mean, that's what I was kind of trying to capture with the Metacritic score. I think that works to an extent, even though there are a lot of statistical problems with Metacritic scores. It is just a plain average. And, you know, one person's 70 is another person's 80, one person's 80 is another person's 90, so there's definitely problems with that. I think on the aggregate, it should do a fine job of that. But, you know, you do make a good point, and Dr. Gill brought this up too, in that more sophisticated publishers are more likely to exclude women from their covers if it is statistically significant enough that they know that, you know? So the higher budget games are likely going to not have women if their marketing team knows that it's not going to sell. So that's another thing to consider. But yeah, we'll tackle that when it arises.
And then the other issue that I found with, so like sports games, for example, the majority of sports games are
Men, yeah.
are male-dominated sports.
I think every single sports game I had in the data was just a dude on the cover. So
the problem there, kind of, you have a little bit of a bias in your data right there because they're never going to put a woman on the cover.
right.
Not because they don't want to, but because.
Yeah, I mean.
UFC 3.
I wasn't around during those days.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but would the genre dummy make up for that in any sense?
So I would say, are you accounting? So you would have to basically be able to factor out the male aspect of it. So you'd have to have one of your dummy variables would be basically a blank cover.
Right. Well, I do have a dummy for text only, like the cover is just text.
We just run the same regression, but with sports
Removed.
no as the substitute for male.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because I had to, like in education, where I had to run a few different regressions. I want to test individual subjects as well as just test how many subjects affected outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to swap out your variables when you want to test something like that,
Yeah.
or else you get multi-collinearity.
Right. Cool. Okay. I guess if there aren't any more questions, I'll wrap up. Thank you guys.